What I'd like to do is to start off by asking, how did you decide to go into the military? And did you come from a military family?
Um, well, I didn't come from a military family. I guess in the 50s, we watched a lot of movies, cowboy and Indian movies on Saturday matinees and war movies. So I was about 7 years old when the Korean War was going on. So somehow I had a little inkling for the military. And when I went to college, I took ROTC and I entered college in September of 1963. And at the time, they had two options. You could, when you get out, you can serve a 6 month reserve duty or National Guard duty, or you could choose a 2 year active service. So I said, well, that sounds okay. I'll do the 6 months. I wasn't that gung ho. And the second semester or late first semester, they changed the policy. Washington changed the policy. Said no more 6 months. You got to go in for 2 years. And and if you didn't really go along with that, then you can take your chances in the draft. So I said, if you can't beat them, you join them. So I stayed in. And so I graduated in 67. And my parents convinced me to go to grad school to maybe the war would be over. I mean, the demonstrations were going on. Longer the war went, the more the demonstrations. It wasn't fun wearing my uniform on drill periods in college. The girls were not blowing me kisses or anything. So it was a pretty rough ROTC. And in 63, when we did these weekly drill meetings, and we had a full platoon in September of 63, 30 cadets. By the time I was cadet platoon leader in my senior year in 67, I only had 5 cadets in my platoon. Nobody was going to ROTC anymore. Nobody wanted to join the military. And it was still before the lottery. But if you were halfway physically able, or not even physically able, you're going to get drafted until the lottery came. And so that's what I did. I stayed in, and when I graduated from getting me my MBA, I went into the quartermaster branch. So I spent 1 year at Fort Lee, Virginia. The first chapter of my book was kind of a setup for the rest of the book. And uh, around the end of my tour at Fort Lee, they said, we want you for the ASA. I mean, I was one of the top people in my quartermaster basic class, and I took an advanced supply management. I had an MBA. The Army Security Agency tries to get the top soldiers, and so they said they needed a supply guy out there, and so that's where I was sent. And so when I got over there, they want to send first lieutenants. They really don't want to send second lieutenants, so they try to give you a year in the States. This is not only quartermaster for most of the other branches. And so when I went over, it was March of 70. And it just depends. Sometimes you luck out on your tour. And so my first duties, our quarters were downtown Matrang in a villa. Had 14-foot ceilings. We had a fan we turned on at night to keep the mosquitoes off. And there was a house next door full of single Vietnamese women. And so life was a lot better for me than a lot of the others. And I decided to write my book when kind of some crazy things were going on down the villa, as you could imagine. 14 staff officers. We had a bar upstairs, bartender. Life was good. But, there's a lot of crazy stories going on. I said, well, that's interesting. This might make a good book. And so Uh, around 2 or 3 months into my tour, I was walking over to the supply. I was in logistics S4. I had to pass by the headquarters, and there was Spec Murphy out there with a hose in one hand and a sponge in the other, and he was washing the palm plants to get the dust off. I said, Spec Murphy, what are you doing that? Well, the colonel from Group 509th is coming up to inspect our battalion. And the lieutenant colonel wanted me to get the dust off of these plants. And said, after I dust these plants, I got to put a fresh coat of paint on these rocks over here. And I just shook my head. I said, Specialist Murphy, look at the parking lot. It's a dirt parking lot. You're going to get dust on these plants after you get through washing them. And he said, I know, sir, but that's what I've got to do. And the next couple of days, I still see him out there washing the plants. And then they had a real bright idea how to cut down on the dust. And the colonel decided to put Pima Prime, kind of a tar-like substance, early in the morning in the parking lot so the dust wouldn't get on the plants. And I said, so that was great. It worked good. It was nice and hard, and there's no dust. But at around 12 o'clock, when we went to lunch, the sun had heated the Pima Prime into a tar-like substance. It's like Briar Rabbit stepping into the tar pit. So, and, and the XO there, I'll call him the Penguin. He's a major, and he was out there, and he was stuck out there for a while, lifting his boots up, and all the tar was coming off of it. So that didn't work. So eventually, a few hours later, I don't know how they did it. Within a couple of hours, they got rid of all the tar. I don't know if they put more dirt on it or what, but it wasn't around very long. And I said, this would make a great book. I said it could be as funny as MASH, the movie MASH, and people wouldn't believe it because I came over there in '70 and I'd already seen in Walter Cronkite. I saw all the tet battles on TV. I saw the nightly news with blood and guts. And here I'm over here, and we're putting tar on the parking lot to keep the dust down, and we're washing the plants. I just couldn't believe it. So I said, okay. Uh, I started, so every little point that came up during my tour that I thought it was hilarious, and unfortunately, sometimes it was tragedy too. I just put it in my memory. I said, okay, this is going to go in my book. And unfortunately, it took me 55 years to write that book. I mean, I couldn't type, and it was I had three antagonists in the book, and they're pretty antagonistic, and so it's kind of a risky book to write. And eventually, I learned to type, and then AO came along. AO was short for Agent Orange. It started knocking on my door, and I said, "Well, I better get off my duff and write this thing. Write it for your grandkids, write it for your kids." And so that's when I finally did it, 55 years later. And I said, it's a book about the support troops. And I said, well, I looked on the top 100 books. If you go to Vietnam Memoirs and you look at the top 100 books, they're all about point men and infantry guys, helicopter pilots. They're all about combat soldiers. There's none about a supply officer. And I asked my brother, who is he lives in Pittsburgh, and he's gone to your live meetings, by the way, up there. He's donated some books. And I said, well, Carl, my brother, has read 400 history books, military history books. And he says, well, nobody's going to read about a supply officer. It could be boring. And I said, well, I don't think my book's going to be boring. So I kind of disagree with you. And so I finally wrote my book, and it was published in August 6, 2025. I show a little picture of the book right here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the Through a Soldier's Eyes, the Vietnam memoir of Lieutenant Alan Hansen. And when I went over there, it was March 5th, 1970, and the Vietnam War had three phases. I just want to tell you the environment I was in. I was in the last phase. The first phase, a couple of years, it was we were Vietnamese advisors. And then the main part of the war was the search and destroy missions. That was from 66 through May 1969. Um, and our policy was to kill more of them than we were being killed. And those guys had it bad. They were out there. Netflix documentary says they were out in the field 240 days searching for the enemy. And it was a rough life. They didn't have a villa to sleep in. They were in a foxhole. And, as a support troop, it bothered me. I really believe it bothers all support troops, non-combat troops. A little bit of guilt for not being a grunt or a helicopter pilot going in there. It was, and I especially had that guilt when I lived in the villa and we had a bar upstairs. And at 9 o'clock every night, I came downstairs and opened my door, and my beautiful Vietnamese girlfriend was just waiting for me. So, it did bother me quite a bit, but it's just luck of the draw. I mean, could have been somebody else got that. So I don't think the grunts will like my book because they really had it tough, and they were the true heroes of that war when they were out there. Uh, but I dedicate my book to all the soldiers in Vietnam, support troops, and we all had roles to fill. We did our best to do it. So the that phase of the search and destroy ended, and Hamburger Hill basically ended that phase. And so after that, the time I was over there, it was the Vietnamization and the pacification era, where we were supposed to teach the Vietnamese how to conduct the war and pacify the villagers. So we're basically, most of the troops out there, we had excess troops at that time for that role. So we're basically marking time. The morale in the US kept getting worse. The demonstrations, the morale in Vietnam for among our troops were getting worse. And we started doing harm to each other. And it was the dark period of our military and it's a dark period of the Vietnam War then. You were a little bit, I think you were in 68, you got back in 68, but from into 69 on, the morale was bad, the discipline was bad. And I have examples in my book, where I saw a couple of the bodies of the MPs that were killed by their own enlisted men when they gave him basically an Article 15. He went in and this is March 10th and shot the CO, the captain, and the first sergeant in the head, and then killed himself. That's what happens when the morale just gets so bad. So basically, I have crazy stuff going on one day and other bad stuff the next, and that's the way it was during the tail end of the war.
Was it normal for officers, or was it enlisted as well, to actually live off base during that time period? Because I know when I was in, we were allowed off base when, quote, town was open, but that was only some of the time. Most of the time, town was considered off limits. So nobody lived off base,
Yeah,
and particularly at night. So I was just curious because you talk about the villa, and that villa is off base, and then you go in the mornings and go to your duty station on the base.
right. Yeah.
Was that considered normal for all over the area, or
Well,
you were at?
it's the people stationed in Saigon. It was always that way in Saigon. You lived in base sometimes. It just depends. Different time periods.
Mhm.
Uh, they shut down Nha Trang because during the Tet Offensive, the VC took over Nha Trang. They were walking down the street just right in front of our villa, my girlfriend saw him just walking down the street carrying the VC flags. So they shut the town down. Um, but yet, we had a villa downtown. The first field force was kind of downtown and right near the beach. So it just depends. But most places in Vietnam, most of the time, the towns were off limits. And to be frankly with you, I've always wondered why the VC didn't come in and wipe us off in that villa. I mean, we had our rifles, but they were in our closets. We had three Nun guards, the Chinese, ethnic Chinese. They had the monopoly on security in most of the bases, but they were sleeping sometimes. We had three of them, 8-hour shifts, and a lot of times we'd catch them sleeping. So I was too busy living life to think about it all the time. But occasionally you would say, well, if they wanted to, they could wipe us out and probably be pretty easy. It's just one of the, but you get lackadaisical over there. You just, you don't think about it that much. So what I can do is,
Let me ask you another question about your service.
uh-huh.
Although you were supply and quartermaster, and you were taking care of all of the needs of the ASA troops that you were with. First off, explain a little bit about the ASA because the military had a number of MOSs that were um, kind of under the radar
Mhm.
or behind the scenes. And most people didn't realize who they were, and what they did. And secondly, I love the name of what you guys were called because it was really radio replacement and had nothing to do with what you really did and what ASA was all
Yeah.
about. Even though you were supply, I mean, what you guys were doing was all intelligence work.
Yes, that's right. It's radio research. So it's basically I was drafted into it because I needed a supply person. Most of the people were recruited into the Army Security Agency. And there was back in September, your club did a interview with all the ASA people, and they were recruited because the recruiters for the ASA says there's no ASA in Vietnam. So the guys joined up for 4 years. Well, they don't call them ASA in Vietnam, like you say, it's radio research. And so and basically, when we went over there, we had a compound, a gated compound, and we had to have badges that we wore around our neck, and it had the 313th Radio Research Battalion. And when I was getting my badge, I asked the supply officer of our sister company, I says, oh, why do they call us radio research? I mean, we're trying to be secret over here. But it brings up more questions because how can you have thousands of people researching radios? I mean, how much radio does it needs to be researched? And he said, yeah, I know, kind of crazy. So what we did when the 330th, they were in Pleiku and they moved over to Nha Trang in May of 70. And they were the bands that had all the signal equipment, the communications, the receivers, and they would get on their headphones and listen to the Morse code, the VC, the NBA, Morse code. They would listen to the voice traffic. And that's what the 330th, which is the company under the 313th, that was their mission. And they were on these vans. And we had about a dozen of them under this tin roof, and they were about 4 or 5 people in a van with listening. They had 12-hour shifts. They operated 24 hours um, throughout the day, 2 shifts. And basically, what happened? Nha Trang, the main base there was called Camp McDermott, and it was a small base. It wasn't a big base like Long Binh or Cam Ranh Bay. And the VC would shoot off the rockets from the hills and right into our base. And they came pretty close because, Cameron Bay or Long Bend, you could have a rocket come in. It could be a mile away, but they all came pretty close. And eventually, what happened is, I think there must have been about a dozen within 100 yards when I was there. And our people on the vans and those, collecting the intelligence, intercepting the Morse code, they had to stay in there even during rocket attacks. And I looked around and gosh, there wasn't enough bunkers for all the people. There must have been 100 people in there. With 12 vans, we had a ramp and we had operations sergeants. So they were there, but they couldn't take cover when rockets came in. There wasn't many at a time, maybe two or three, but they would come in close. And eventually, we did get that direct hit right on the tin roof over the vans and exploded into the vans. We had 11 casualties, one KIA. I was in the S4 office, 20 yards away, and I could hear the shrapnel pinging against the tin walls. And so that really shook up the troops. And at the time that happened, I was the safety officer, battalion safety officer. There's a little problem with the Jeep washing uh, episode. If you read the book, you're familiar with the captain wanted me to wash his Jeep, and I just couldn't do it. He ordered me in front of everybody. I was the assistant S4, and I'm saying wash because I grew up in Missouri. We put an R, so they said, wash Lieutenant Hansen. I want you to wash my Jeep, and everybody. It just got real silent. You could hear a pin drop. Everybody looked up at me, and I had to have a comeback. And so I said, well, Specialist Cox, he was the new guy, go wash the captain's Jeep. And then the captain says, no, Lieutenant Hansen, I want you to wash my Jeep. Well, I couldn't do that. I had to disobey an order. I considered the order invalid. And, as an officer, we're trained to present ourselves like godlike to the enlisted men because we want them to follow our orders no matter what. So I said, if I did that, I would lose all respect. There's no way those guys would, in case the S4 was gone, no way they would, if I had to tell them to drive down to Cameron Bay, they wouldn't do it. So I said, no, sir, I can't do that. It's an illegal order. It's conduct of becoming an officer. And I left. And it was lunchtime. I went to see if the colonel was in. He wasn't in. And so I went to lunch but unfortunately, the captain got to the colonel before I did and told the story. So after that, I was, the place wasn't big enough for both of us. So the colonel made me a battalion safety officer, which is a make work job. And that's when the rocket hit. I was a battalion safety officer. So I went down to the operations sergeants and I said, you guys don't have enough bunkers over here. Well, we can't have bunkers. They're not going to do any good because we can't leave. We have to stay here. So, even the support troops are heroic in their own way. I mean, they don't have to be out in the boondocks. And we had a Spec 5 that kept driving by himself down to Cameron Bay to get supplies on an emergency basis. And that's not a safe drive. So anyway, they made me the battalion safety officer. And then not too long after that, I became the supply officer. They moved me over to 330th, give me something to really do. Because, I was racking my brains knowing what to do as a battalion. It's a made up job. They didn't have it before. I think I was in that job for 10 days. And, I wanted to, contribute. And then the supply officer was the ideal job. I got my own 45. I got my poncho liner, and I got my own Jeep. So life was even better than before. So, unfortunately, our time in the villa came to an end. The military didn't want to rent it. I guess it was too costly. And so they moved us back on base, which became difficult. It was made it difficult to be with my girlfriend, who she'd be, like I said, she would always waiting for me at in my villa room. So we had to arrange. I actually went when I moved on base. I actually went out and got a room just for us because the company commander of the 330th, he was a major. He had 500 people in the company. He didn't want girls in our barracks, the 330th barracks. So I went over to got another room, bribed the one of the Vietnamese hooch maids to set up a room for us. um, I mean, she was an important companion. It's if people really got to know the Vietnamese woman, most didn't really have the opportunity, but they had a caring nature about themselves, and they had charms, and it was and I was a late bloomer, so but I was enraptured by her, and so we continued to see each other. I'd go down in the train in Camp McDermott. You could bring the girls on base. It was kind of rare, not too often at too many bases you could do that. So uh, there was no officers down there checking in their girlfriends. I didn't see any officers, but I wanted to see her, so I was probably the only officer going down there checking in my girl. And they took the ID card because that's important. And, they use the ID card as a method to control the VC,
Mhm.
moving in and out. You had to have this ID card. So when you checked your girl in, you turned it into the MP post. And when you took your girl out, you got your badge back. So anyway, that's how we continued to see each other for the entire tour. And um, uh, what happened when I became the supply officer? The guys in the vans, we call it the ramp, the 12 vans. They were pretty shook up about it because they're there. You never know when the next rocket came in. Fortunately, it's a 107 millimeter, which is smaller than the 122. And the VC started packing more explosive in those rockets as time went on into the warhead. And I tell you, if a 122 hit that place, we'd lose 100 soldiers. So they were pretty leery. And so when I became supply officer, I had the great idea. Says, okay, let's sandbag the tops of those trucks. And so I talked to supply the operations officer over there at the vans. I said, let's sandbag all those. Let's put 4 layers, 5 layers of sandbags. So when the rocket hits the tin roof, it'll explode into these sandbags, and the troops will be safe. We'll basically make an in-place bunker for them. That's a good idea. So I had my supply guys and they had extra ramp people came over and they started putting the sandbags on top of the roofs of these vans. And then a couple of hours later, the new operations officer came, Sergeant Matthews, and said, Lieutenant Hansen, stop the sandbagging. The vans, the roofs are collapsing. The weight of the sandbags are collapsing the roof. I said, oh, okay. And so we had to remove all the sandbags. And so then, the troops felt pretty good at first. And then, a couple of days later, we had a rock attack when I was in my bunk. And I was on the second story of the barracks. So those guys, if the rockets come in, they're going to get wiped out on the second floor. First floor people will be kind of safe because when it hits, it explodes downward. And so we had a rocket attack when I was in bed in the morning, and it came pretty close. It landed probably 60 yards away. And so I jumped out of my cot, had my flak jacket on. I put it on and got underneath my bed. I'm not going to it'd take too long to go down and get into the bunkers. And the rats lived in those bunkers. They owned them. I mean, nobody wanted to go in there unless you had to. So that's what I did. I got my flak jacket on and I was underneath the bed. I had a room that had roommates. So there's a roommate, a brand new second lieutenant. They sent a second lieutenant over. I don't know why. And he woke up and he looked over at me, saw me underneath the bed, and he's kind of questioning what was going on. Then another rocket came in even closer, and he tried to get up and he fell down and his legs were caught up in the sheet. It was hilarious. But so I got to thinking. I said, well, this my little in-place bunker only has one mattress on it. I said, well, I'm going to go and put 4 or 5 mattresses on this, and so it'll be more protected. I don't know if it would help at all. So when I went into supply, I had a great idea. I said, guys, you know what we're going to do? We have all these extra mattresses over here. We're going to put the mattresses on top of the vans. So we'll put 4 or 5 layers of mattresses. And so when the rocket hits the tin roof, it'll explode into the mattresses. And so our guys will be safe. And believe it or not, that worked. We set 5 or 6 layers of mattresses on there. I had 300 or 400 extra mattresses, and at the same time, I told my supply guys, I said, okay, we got the biggest building in the train. So one time, a couple of years ago, a rocket hit this big supply warehouse. So I said, we got a big chance of getting hit because we're the biggest building out here. And the rocket that hit the vans just flew right over the top of the supply warehouse. So I said, let's sandbag our desk in. We got to sandbag our desk in, and it was around closing time, and I told my supply clerks, okay, let's sandbag all these desks in. He said, okay, Lieutenant. So I went home and then I went to the barracks, and then the next morning I came in. They only had the sandbags around my desk, not theirs. I said, how's this going to look to the guys coming in for getting supplies that my desk is sandbagged in and none of my troops? I said, hurry up, take the layers off of mine and put it around theirs so it doesn't look so bad. And fortunately, nobody came in, so they put at least 2 layers around theirs. And of course, my supply sergeant, I call him the old salt, he thought the whole thing was hilarious. And so eventually they finished that day. We sandbagged our desk in. I'm talking about this book being comical leadership. I mean, that doesn't exclude me either. And the supply sergeant always would shake his head and give me grief about the sandbags around our desk. And then about a week later, we had another rocket attack, and they came in pretty close. And supply clerks got underneath their desk. And just before I got underneath mine, I looked over at the supply sergeant, and he was getting under his desk. He wasn't laughing anymore. So um, that's the story on the sandbags and the shaky lieutenant who had all the sandbags, all the desks sandbagged. So we felt a little better. I don't know if it would help. I think it might. And as far as I know, we left all the mattresses over the vans, and the troops felt better. They told me they felt better. So
Anything that you can do to put up a barrier between you and what's coming in.
yeah, yeah, it
And and the Trang was one of those bases that took a lot of rockets.
yeah,
Any of the other, like we didn't get rockets, we got
yeah,
mortars.
yeah.
But Da Nang got rocketed all the time.
Well, I
And
tell you what, I tell you what happened. We used to get mortared too before I got there. And I talked to one of the guys that were there before I was. And so the VC would sit up there and send in mortars. And they had a limited range. They could hit the officers club. They could hit the officer barracks. They could hit the air base. But they used to send in mortars all the time. And then up in the Hawk Hill, right adjacent to our camp, they put up anti-aircraft guns to knock out the mortar units. So periodically they would sit there and shoot with the anti-aircraft gun. They said it was against the Geneva Convention. I don't know if it was or wasn't. It's one of those things that, yeah, maybe it was. So they stopped the mortars, and then they started using rockets, and then they'd have delayed fuses on the rockets. Now, one of the EMs said, well, the delayed fuse works by having a glass of water and then it evaporates and the rocket goes off. I read somewhere where they use watches, timepieces to set off the rockets, but those guys are long gone when the rockets went off. So that's why we didn't get mortared anymore because we had these anti-aircraft guns.
Hmm.
And like I say, it could be against Geneva, but if you kill somebody, a bad guy, really shouldn't make a difference how you do it. Uh, if you're protecting our own troops. So we got rockets, and in May we did this incursion into Cambodia to interdict the supplies, May through July or something. I think it helped. It cut down some of the rocket attacks. It's just from my own personal observation, but we still got them every once in a while. Every other week we'd get some, and so it was close. It was a small base, and it's one of the dangers you have, even though you're not out in the boondocks. Uh, you can never know when that bullet or rocket has your name on it.
That's right. A mortar or a rocket or a stray bullet doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You have some pictures that
Sure. Let's see if we can do that.
to show some of what the triangle looked like.
This, the villa,
Mm-hmm.
and on top is our bar.
Nice.
And we had a bartender there, and this iron grate on the street, on the dirt street, was to the house next door. It was basically Mamasan house, a house of ill repute. And so the girls at night between 8 and 9 would come out in and visit their boyfriends. It's all battalion officers in the villa. Not everybody had a girlfriend, and but it was the guards would let them in, and it was very convenient. So um, I had this girlfriend for the entire period, and the S2, the security intelligence officer, and ASA, they had a term called close and continuous. We weren't supposed to, he told us that, me in particular, I wasn't supposed to be close and continuous with the same Vietnamese girl. And he was kind of dropping hints, but he knew I was continuing to see her. And but I found out just about a month and a half ago, I went online and I finally got those regulations, the ASA regulations, and the S2 was misinterpreting the regulations. The regulations were you weren't supposed to be close and continuous with anyone who's adverse to the United States, the
Mhm.
enemy. So the guy he didn't know the real rule. And so but he kept saying it. And so she was not she was not a adversary. In fact, I was kind of counting on her to tell me if she heard through the grapevine if we were going to get hit at the villa, she would let me know. And so we had this close relationship throughout my whole tour there. I didn't get to see her every night when I moved on base. I would see her maybe every other night, and uh, when I left, it was terrible. It was just I wasn't happy. Everybody else was happy to leave, but I had mixed feelings about it. I wanted to get back and see my parents, my brothers, but it was a bad time. And when I every time I read my book, I have to do my own proofreading. I get choked up every time I'm saying goodbye to her when my tour was over. So we when I got back to the States, I was shook up. it wasn't post-traumatic stress. It was in a way, but it wasn't like a grunt who was being shot at and he'd see all of his buddies dying. It was the fact that well, I can tell you now. I mean, the other review guy had already let the cat out of the bag, but she got pregnant during my tour there, and I tried to be careful. I used I didn't because they had it tough enough. I mean, these people they lived in poverty, and the way she managed to survive was to become quote a husband to a particular soldier for his tour. And then when he'd go back to his wife or girlfriend or go back, she'd become widowed. And then she was for the next year, she would select somebody else. And the process went on and on. And she had a child already in Cholan. Her mother was taking care of the child, an American Vietnamese kid. She was actually ethnic Chinese. Um, so uh, I didn't want to, you know, the inflation was running crazy in Vietnam at the time. The piastre, the money they used, was completely worthless. I mean, they had 400% inflation over a period of 3 or 4 years. So the piastre wasn't worth much, and basically I paid in piastre. You're not supposed to pay in NPC, but I said if they wanted an excuse to throw me into the brig, they would do it through the NPC. And in fact, I don't know, the military, they had great courtroom procedures, but there was no justice in the military because if the brass is after somebody, they can court martial them. If they're late to work, everybody else can be late to work, but if that person's late to work, they can court martial for failure to repair, which is a 6 month prison sentence. And so um, I used Piaster uh, but I didn't want her to get pregnant. So I used a condom every time except one time. But I don't know. And she was not totally faithful. I mean, I guess if chips were down and if she needed some money to pay off the white mice who was collecting bribes from the house, they probably had so she was pregnant. I didn't know if it was mine or not, but when I left Vietnam and the combination, her and the child, I had my buddy, Lieutenant Mancini, send me a letter. She was pregnant when I left, and she gave birth about a month or two afterwards. And he told me, yeah, she gave birth to a boy. So for a whole year back there, it was like I was post-traumatic stress syndrome, although it's because I was, it was the other circumstance. And I didn't do much. I didn't look very hard to get a job. When we were in the officers club complaining about work, I said, well, just to break up the monotony, I said, I'm going to go and go find rich women to take care of me. So I got up and traveled around the United States. I went to Florida, spent time there. I went to Atlanta and just traveled around. And finally, the reserves caught up with me, and I had to go to reserve meetings because I had 1 year of active reserve to do. And then eventually, the Civil Aeronautics Board, CAB at the time, had low-cost flights to Bangkok and back from DC, $500. So I said, I'm just not getting anywhere. It's driving me nuts worrying about the baby and her. So this is a spoiler. On the book, I won't tell you where I found her or not. I mean, people want to have a little suspense in the book. But I went and I first found a overseas employment firm that had an office in Bangkok. And I got this low-cost flight. This is back in March in 1972, 1 year after I got back. And so I went to Washington, D.C. to get my visa. And they said, well, Mr. Hansen is at the Vietnamese embassy. Said, we can only give you a 3-day visa. to go to Vietnam. They don't want people to go to Vietnam. So the most you can go is 3 days. So then I said, well, hell, that's not going to work. So I flew out to Bangkok anyway. And I said, well, I'll try to get a visa over here. And lo and behold, you can get one for 30 days from Bangkok, from the Vietnamese embassy in Bangkok, where you couldn't do it back in the States. So I I was going to get a job in Bangkok and then travel back and forth to Vietnam. That was my plan. And the office that this place was supposed to have didn't exist. It never existed. It was just kind of a sham overseas employment firm. I mean, I paid him $225. Anytime you pay a headhunter, it's kind of shaky to begin with. But so I stayed in uh, Bangkok for a couple of weeks, and yeah, I try to get a job there, but they don't hire American accountants because the Thai people had enough accountants they could hire. I mean, they could hire you if you're an engineer that they didn't have enough qualifications for. But I was out of luck there, so my plans of getting a job didn't work. So I flew into Saigon. Before I left, she said she was going to move to Cholon, a suburb of Saigon. So I had the address she gave me where she's going to go back and live with her mother and her first child. And so I got into Bangkok, I mean into Saigon, and then the next day I went down there looking for her. And the guy didn't say, well, I can't find that address, but here's the street. So I'm on the street and I'm walking down there, and the little kids, the little street urchins are going to follow you around. So I had several of them follow me around. It was like Pied Piper, and I just couldn't find her. I just couldn't find the address. I asked for people. They didn't know. So I gave them the name, and they just didn't recognize the name. And I said, okay, well, I'll go back to Nha Trang. Maybe she's still living in the same place. And so I hopped on a plane in a couple of days, went up Nha Trang, and I knocked on the house next door. Beba was the lead mama san. She was a tough character, by the way. Not as sweet as Hai, but she was, you know, uh, I knocked on the door. Nobody was there, and so I had to get a hotel. And lo and behold, the hotel I got was the former villa. They made it into a hotel. So I got a room. I got a room. I said, well, I want a room for, I got a 14-day visa. So I want a room for about 11 days. That's how much time I had left on my visa. And so I was put on the second floor. It wasn't the exact same room. I actually tried to go on top to the top floor to, uh, you know, to see if it was still up there, but it was blocked off. So the most I could do was come out on this second floor balcony and look up and down the street. And so I waited around. I went to our favorite little cafe around the corner where we used to get iced coffee, um, and see if she was there. She wasn't. I waited a couple hours, and then I went again and knocked on Bayba's door, the house next door, and Bayba answered the door. And she was, shocked. Nobody comes back. People go, but they never come back. I says, Bayba, where's Hai? And she says, Hi, she's not here. She no here. She go live Cameron Bay. She go live Cameron Bay. So I said, okay, do you know where she lives there? No, 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 know where she lives. And I said, where's the baby? Hi's baby. He says, I don't know. Hi knows where. And so in a couple of days, a day later, I caught a bus and I went over Cameron Bay looking for her. And the MP Cameron Bay Village was kind of a no man's land. It's dangerous in there. They have these cowboys, the Vietnamese hoodlums, and they steal from the GIs, they steal from the Vietnamese, and the gang in the train was run by an ex-GI and on a Honda motorcycle with those high handlebars. Uh, we all thought it was a rumor until when I came to Saigon, a guy on a motorcycle gave me a ride, and it turned out to be the guy that led the gang in the train. I thought I was a goner. I thought he was going to drop me off at his gang, and I was because they killed one GI up there. He stepped out of a bar and they knifed him to death. And I asked him about it. I said, so your guys killed a GI up there. And he says, oh, sometimes they do things, they do it on their own. I told him not to do that. So I don't know where this guy is, if he ever came back. I didn't catch his name. I didn't remember the name. He knew one of the people in the 330th, you know. So anyway, I went to Cameron Bay, and I was going to go into the Cameron Bay village to look for her. I had no idea where she was. The MP says, where do you think you're going, soldier? I said, well, I'm going in here. And he said, you can't do that. It's off limits. You're going to get killed in there. It's no man's land. I said, well, I'm a civilian, and I showed him my passport. I said, you can't stop me. I'm going in. I came all the way halfway around the world to find her. And so, well, it's your funeral. You can go in there. And so I started going in there and just walking down the street, hoping I didn't run into any cowboys. I didn't ask any group of young men. I didn't ask them where she was, but there again, there's literally when I was finished, but I spent about an hour and a half looking. And there was like 24 little kids following me around, and they were giggling. And the Pied Piper of Cameron Day couldn't find her. And so I said, I'm not getting anywhere. So I finally went back to the train. And next day, I was feeling kind of sorry for myself, and at the same time, it was like March 30, and I still had a radio. We still had the Armed Forces radio, and all of a sudden, I hear a news bulletin. March 31st, it was. It says this is a news bulletin from the Armed Forces radio. There is an incursion. Appears to be a somewhat large incursion of the North Vietnamese over the border. They're heading toward Quang And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I said, I'm here by myself. I don't know what to do. Nobody's here to protect me. I just hope they don't come down this far. And I'm at 2 o'clock. It seems like the Vietnamese police take their siestas. And I went down the market to get some food, and the Vietnam cops are not there. 2 o'clock, they were still sleeping. So I guess they weren't concerned about it. And so I spent a few days with the news coming in, still getting worse. And first of all, I wasn't supposed to be over there. I wasn't supposed to go back. The ASA policy was you don't go back. You don't. They had another interview. Breakfast Club had an interview with the Vietnam vet ASA a couple of days ago, and he said they told him it was a 10-year policy. You can't go overseas to a hazardous zone. Well, I was there within 1 year. So, I mean, the theory being they could capture me. I didn't know a lot of the technical stuff, but I did know enough. And, one day a couple of plainclothesmen knocked on my door. They had pistols under their blouse, and they asked me if I had a pistol. I didn't know if they're police, and they showed me the badge. I had to take their word for it, and then they said then they wanted to see my passport, and I showed them my passport. Say, what's your business here? Well, I'm just to see your beautiful city, you know. So they left me alone, and so this was going on for a day or two, and then I was really feeling sorry for myself. I mean, I went all these places I couldn't find her, and And then all of a sudden, a beautiful young Vietnamese girl shows up with a little poodle, and just out of nowhere. And she shows up in the lobby, and we start talking to her, and that took her over to Hi, my girlfriend's and I's favorite cafe. We had some chow and a little bit of dessert, and she was absolutely beautiful. Uh, Spoke very good English, a little taller, and she just showed up. I don't know if she was a Matahari spy trying to get information out of me, but she never asked. And so I had a relationship with her for the next 8 or 9 days, nights, and I never really understood her situation, but it was, kind of I needed her at the time, and but that's about as much as I'll say as far as the search. I got to keep the suspense open as whether I found her or not. So far, everybody, all the reader reviews and the editorial reviews hasn't mentioned. So, and I guess when I was talking on the ASA chat a couple of weeks ago, one of the ladies bought the book while I was chatting, and she said, "Oh, I'm glad you didn't tell me if you found her or not." So I'm kind of keeping that as long as I can. It was tough for me to write the book because I'm from the Midwest. I'm not. You had to bare your soul because they just wouldn't. And I had there's one paragraph in there, but I call it a spice level 5. I'm sure if you read the book, you remembered it. But because the general rumor among the troops and the guys that had girlfriends is that the Vietnamese girls didn't show any passion. They didn't have any passion. They said you could be making love to them, and they could as well as be eating an apple at the same time. So I had to, I had a short paragraph on the sexual content that is kind of hard for me to write, but I would regret it if I didn't put it in there. And believe it or not, the women are buying my book. And that's what I want because they are the ones that buy the books. It's not the men. They don't read books anymore. And if you can get a woman to read a Vietnam War book, albeit it has the love story, and that's the angle that they want, then I've accomplished something. And so
Well,
anyway,
I thought it was fascinating that you took the approach of the support troops because that was very, very different than, as you say, from most of the books written. Um, and they say you hear various numbers, 1 to 10, 1 to 15, whatever.
yeah,
But there are a large number of people that never are involved in the army. In the army, they're not grunts. In the Marines, they're not. That you have people that are in the back areas who are including, which I never knew, but in the Marines, they actually have people that their job is to document everything. And when
yeah,
they take typewriters and they're typing up every action that goes on, and they're documenting everything. And it's not just a correspondent, but it's really a documentarian who's logging every action that goes on, who got shot at, uh, if anybody got injured, how seriously, and they document everything. So a lot of people don't realize the different classifications that exist. So for you to write a book about the support group,
exactly.
it's fascinating.
The support troops, their story has never been told, as far as I know. And better yet, the Vietnamese female
Right.
friendly has never been told. And I wanted to tell her story in a way she was supporting the troops. I mean, we didn't operate in a vacuum over there.
Right.
And the guys that had the opportunity in the cities that were open, they had the opportunity to really get to know our Vietnamese female companions. And to me, she's a hero in a way. She read a tough life. I don't know what happened to her. Um, Unfortunately, when the NBA did take over, they slaughtered the people. Uh, President Ford, that Eastertide invasion, when I was over there, that happened in March, and it lasted for 6 months. We actually slaughtered the NBA. We used smart bombs for the first time. We used TOW anti-tank missiles. We mined Haiphong Harbor for the first time. They lost 100,000 troops, and that prevented them for the next 3 years from invading. But they did the same thing in 75, spring of 85. President Ford was the president at the time. He tried to get Congress to fund that air campaign that wreaked havoc on the NBA. Congress would not pass it. America was tired of the war. And so they quickly took over and they put all the people had anything to do with the U.S. into these re-education camps. And they had to grow their own food. A lot of them starved. A lot of them were in there for 10 years. And then when they got out, they couldn't get jobs. They were not full citizens. So then they took to the boats and they died at sea. So I don't know if she died in that, if she was put into a camp because she knew an American soldier. A lot of the support troops had a lot of guilt, and one of them is that for leaving her behind or a possible child. A lot of people don't even know if they had kids over there. I saw on another podcast this Vietnam vet, 50 years later, he gets a call from Texas from, he got an email and he says, I think I'm your daughter. It's a Vietnamese girl. And so they're reconnected after 50 years. He had no idea, but he had an apartment in Saigon and he's living with this Vietnamese girl for a period of time. And if he should have known things like that could happen, but he was completely surprised. My wife is good with me writing this book. I cleared it with her, and I couldn't have her type the book when we got married in 75 because she was not mellow enough. And I didn't want to ask. So it took me 55 years so I learned how to type and did it myself. And, something to leave the grandkids when you're gone. I think most Vietnam vets should write their story. If it's not to publish, just for namesake. And do you have any other questions about the book?
No, I think without telling the ending, and
Yeah,
I did read it cover to cover, so I do know the ending, but I'm not going to spell it.
sure.
Um, I just found it your perspective was so different
Yeah,
because you were talking about an agency that was doing all the security work that people didn't know about, the support troops, and what it was like doing the supply uh, for all of the unit and what you needed to do and how you had to go about it. That story in itself was fascinating. So
yeah,
I think that really uh, will be appreciated by anybody that reads the book.
yeah. I think it's first of all, like my brother said, it's normally it would be a very boring book, but there's enough going on where I thought it was just the opposite. And I wanted to tell a story of the support troops. I mean, our story is not told, and it's about time to tell it. And more than anything, I want to tell Hi's story because she and women like her, it was like an implied contract. She would provide me like be my wife for like a year, and I would provide her subsistence. I would pay her, once a week. The inflation was so bad over there, though, that it was just, I guess it wasn't enough, but she took that money and she bought me gifts. She bought me Buddhist necklaces that the hooch maids would steal. And then the last gift she gave me was a gold fish necklace that you could wiggle the fish, and if it wiggled a lot, she said it's good luck. You'll make a lot of money. And so I still have that gift. And It's just it's unfortunate a lot of people didn't have the opportunity. Uh, and but you know, the support troops, they lost their lives, not as bad, not as many as the grunts. And but the book also has a lot of uh, parts where, you know, we started killing each other over there. And I'm not an anti-war person, but after a while, I said, you know, we got to get out of here. It's getting bad, you know, especially after my Quartermaster class basic told me the story of the sergeant blowing up the three enlisted men in the bunker because they were smoking marijuana. He was acquitted. They couldn't prove it was him, but I said, you know, it's time to get out. We're not going to win the war. I mean, the search and destroy. We couldn't, you know, first of all, the whole war, we went in like a boxing match with our right hand tied behind us. We couldn't invade North Vietnam, and that's what you normally do if you want to win a war. We couldn't do that because what happened in Korea? The Chinese sent 1 billion of its soldiers in there. And the same thing would have happened. And McNamara finally admitted it that we couldn't go up there because the Chinese would send 1 billion soldiers. And I had a Chinese boss. His dad was a colonel and he worked for Chiang Kai-shek before he was overthrown. And he said what happened in Korea is that China sent the people they wanted to get rid of on the front lines, the people that were not good communists, and they sent those guys to be slaughtered. And they'd do the same in Vietnam. They would send the guys they don't want anymore. They'd send it, make up frontline troops. And so we couldn't really, when the search and destroy mission campaign failed, we were just marking time, and there was no route to winning the war then. We probably could have won the war if we did that air campaign, but we did back in Eastertide. And they would probably be free today. Vietnam would have been free today. We would our smart bombs were it was just wrecking havoc on them, and we'd be driving around in South Vietnamese vehicles instead of South Korean vehicles. It's all built up, you know, skyscrapers. The Vietnam vets are going back. Um, I would like to go back to find out what happened to her, but I don't want to support the communist government over there. And that's what we're doing. I know Todd goes back. He takes trips back there, maybe to help the Vietnam vets overcome their post-traumatic stress syndrome. But I don't know. It's just it's unfortunate, and it's still a communist country. It's not free.
Indeed. Well, Alan, I appreciate you sharing your story.
And I'll show my book one more time.
There you go.
Go out and buy the ebook. I have an ebook version, and actually, it has the photos, the color photos, and it's probably better to look at because you can blow them up.
Right.
I took a lot of paint. Sorry we couldn't show the photos. I probably should have practiced more, but they can see them in my book. They'll have to buy my book to see them.
Yeah. There you go. Get people to actually buy it.
Yeah.
Alan, thank you very much. I
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you, Larry, and thank you for your service, bud.
And welcome home.
Okay. You too. Welcome home.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.